Truth Unveiled here, and today I have some urgent information to share with you. It has to do with Germany and Miss Merkel, because what you're going to see is that the police state is here everywhere. And I'm here at Zero Hedge, and it says Germany debates putting troops on streets to protect against terrorism, because that's exactly why they're doing it. But it says the quiet German militarization continues to escalate. One day after Germany's DPA broke the news that the Merkel government is considering, quote, bringing back nationwide conscription in times of crisis, such as situations in which the country needs to, quote, defend NATO's external borders, strongly hinting at the possibility of a future war, which in turn followed this weekend's shocking announcement that Germans should prepare to stockpile several days of food and water in case of a catastrophe or an attack of a catastrophe as part of the country's revised civil defense concept. Today, NBC reports that Germany debates putting troops on streets to protect against ISIS, when we know better than that. But then the article goes on to say, to be sure, plans to involve soldiers in counterterrorism operations and the suggestion troops could also be used to beef up security in public places have proved controversial in a country only 7 decades removed from totalitarian rule that's still grappling with guilt from the Nazi era. However, Wolfgang Bosbach, a lawmaker from Merkel's CDU party, dismissed such concerns. During the recent terror threat in Munich, the German armed forces and also the military police were put on alert. He told NBC News, they have been deployed in other crises, so why should the military not help with domestic security as well? Don't you see what they're doing? They're always trying to use the guises of security, and oh, we're doing it to beef up the security, and oh, we're bringing in military to help out with security, when that's not the case at all, because there is no threat. There is no threat of terrorism. They're going to keep feeding you and spoon feeding us this because they're using it as an excuse to deploy the military onto the streets. And then it also talks about how in a court decision back in 2012, which allowed Germany's armed forces to be deployed at home for peacetime missions under a, quote, extraordinary emergency situation of catastrophic dimension. But who are the ones planning these emergencies and staging them ahead of time? Now, this is the actual report from NBC, and this was released today, by the way, and it says Germany debates putting troops on streets to protect against ISIS. Well, I wonder who funds ISIS. But anyway, let's keep going, because it says Mainz, Germany. A week-long spate of violent attacks this summer, including 2 involving migrants, has triggered debate about potentially deploying troops on Germany's streets for the first time since World War II. Did you hear that? Not only that, but then it says a July 18th axe and knife attack by an ISIS-inspired 17-year-old Afghan asylum seeker aboard a train near Wurzburg left 5 people seriously injured. It also raised questions about whether new security measures were needed in Germany. Like I said, they're going to keep using that agenda and keep stressing terrorism, because doesn't mainstream media such as NBC and all those other alphabet soups, don't they just love mentioning, oh, Islamic terrorism and oh, Islamic terror, when we know that it's not that at all, and they're always stressing that threat, and they're always blaming it on this in order to divide and conquer, but they're never telling you who the real problem really is and where the real problem really stems from. Hint, hint, all of the Zionists at the very top, along with their intelligence agencies. And then, of course, throughout this entire report, mainstream media has to constantly remind you and constantly drill through your head that, oh, it's linked to Islamic terror, and oh, it was a lone gunman, and oh, it was a Syrian failed asylum seeker, and oh, a lone gunman did it, because that's the story that they want you to believe. That's the story that they're going to continue to feed us, when we know darn better than that. And then it talks about asylum seekers from Syria and Germany by month, and as you can see, the asylum seekers of lists have gone up, and this is sourced from the UNHCR. As you can see, it's more than skyrocketed between 2015 and 2016 alone, but I wonder who's bringing them there. Just ask George Soros and Merkel and all those other elite at the very top, and they'll be happy to tell you that it's them who are the ones who are funding it. Just like they have to continue to remind you of all of the immigration crisis in Europe because they love reminding you of that as well. And here's a graph that even shows you from YouGov Germany's changing attitude to immigration, because they're going to keep feeding us this story as well that, oh, the immigration crisis is an actual crisis when it's not a crisis at all. We know that George Soros and the Zionists are the ones who are funding it. Like I said, it's not really a crisis, just like there's really no such thing as terrorism, because we know that the Zionists and the elite at the very top, they're the ones who fund both sides of the war. Just look at their contributions for both World War I and World War II, and they're using Islam as a means to fund World War III, just like they're funding all of these immigration crises and funding all of these immigrants to be placed in these different places in order to trigger massive upheaval, just as we're seeing. Because there's always a threat of terrorism, isn't there? And I'm here at the Independent, and I reported on this a few days ago, but I'll just reiterate this because there was something very cryptic that's going on in Germany that was announced a few days ago. And it says Germany warns its citizens to stockpile emergency food and water in case of terror attack. Germans will have to stock enough food for 10 days and enough water for 5 days, a newspaper has reported, and this comes from the FAZ, which is a German-run newspaper. But the actual report from the Independent says that the German government is planning to tell citizens to stockpile food and water in their homes in case of a terror attack or catastrophe. This concept for civil defense, which has not been released, will require the population to stockpile enough food for 10 days, according to Frankfurter Allgemeine Sonntagszeitung, or the FAZ newspaper. Citizens would also be required to stock enough water for 5 days. Measures have been announced this month by the government to invest more on its police and security forces, including creating a special unit to fight cybercrime and terrorism. And notice how there's always the threat of cybersecurity too. I wonder if this has anything to do with the planned and staged EMP that's even at the door, but let's keep going. A spokesman for the Interior Ministry said the plan would be discussed by the cabinet on Wednesday and presented by the minister that afternoon. So this occurred today. He declined to give any specific details on the content. And of course, Germany is on high alert because of Islamic terrorism. That's what they want you to believe. We know better than that, and the 69-page report does not see an attack by conventional military forces as likely. But if you just thought it was Germany, and if you just thought that this was a situation that was only going on in Germany, oh no, because it's also happening next door in France too. Because here I am at a report from RT that says threat is real, because the threat is really real, isn't it? France to deploy 3K troops, prepare students for terror attacks on schools. I'm telling you, it's getting much worse than we think. But the actual report says that France will deploy around 3,000 reserve troops to provide security to schools, education, and security ministers have announced. Anti-terror drills aimed at preparing students for potential attacks will also be ramped up. Like I said, another excuse to bring in the military into schools who are going to be spying on your children. And then it says around 12 million French students are preparing to head back to school on September 1st. But the government is also making plans of its own, and that it is. Those plans are aimed at protecting pupils and preparing them for possible attacks on their schools. But are they really aiming to protect them, or is there something bigger going on? All students aged 13 to 14 will be adding basic life-saving measures to their portfolio of skills in case they need to provide assistance to classmates in worst-case scenarios. Right now, only 30% of the students are trained, and this is what the educational minister said in a Wednesday press release, according to AP. But also, school administrators will also be trained each year at the National Gendarmerie Training Center to manage crisis centers and act as liaisons with security officials. And we know that the militarization has just begun. This is only the beginning, folks. It's going to spread like a virus. It's going to spread like the supposed Zika virus, because I'm telling you, it's only getting worse from here. Now, this is a report from the BBC that came out back last month, and it says France to extend state of emergency for 6 months because of, you guessed it, alleged terrorism. Now, why is this important? You may be wondering. It's important because anytime you hear state of emergency, that means that they're using that as an excuse to deploy more military troops onto the streets, just like we're seeing in Germany too. And it says France's National Assembly has voted to extend the state of emergency for 6 months. The move follows last week's attack in Nice, in which 84 people were killed and scores injured when a lorry was driven into the crowds. That's what they want us to believe. It looked more like a hoax, just like Sandy hoax and all those other hoaxes, just like the hoax in Paris back in November of 2015, which is where the first state of emergency was issued and decreed. But then it goes on to say that the extension agreed in the early hours of Wednesday would take the state of emergency until the end of January of 2017. That means that this state of emergency in France is going to last for the entire nation for well over 14 months. And you don't think that's preparation for America? You don't think that any of this is coming to America and coming to a police state near you? It's time to seriously wake up and think again. But it says it is the fourth extension France's parliament has proposed, and the move must be approved by the Senate. So not one, not two, not three, but the fourth extension. The emergency measures give the police extra powers to carry out searches and to place people under house arrest. More draconian laws and draconian things that are being pushed because of the so-called threat of terrorism. And by the way, they can do that in America too. Now the police can just bang on your door without a search warrant in America. And you can look that up on your own time and many other places too. Where do you think it's headed? Now, this report comes from Breitbart. As you can see, more propaganda indeed. Now, this was as of April of 2016, and it says half the French army is now deployed on French streets. And like I said, it's spreading to Germany, as we're seeing, and it's only a matter of time until it makes its way to America. So then it talks about, once again, Islamic terrorism, but then it even says how the French president in November 2015 declared the so-called alleged attacks on France an act of war, when we know better than that. But then it also says, representing France's first wide-scale peacetime military operation on the mainland, Operation Sentinel deploys fully armed and uniformed combat troops to patrol public areas and protect key sites such as synagogues, art galleries, nursery schools, metro stations, and mosques. So basically anywhere that's public. And it says with 10,000 troops across the nation, about 6,500 of which are in the Paris area, The Guardian reports that the scale of Operation Sentinel is so huge it represents the single biggest military operation and volume of any such French operation anywhere in the world. And of course, they talk more about revving up the security and more security measures because that's all we've been constantly hearing. But we also know that this is a giant plan to not only militarize Europe, America, and basically the rest of the entire world, but also to turn the world into a communist police state, because yes, there are even communist goals that have been introduced, because we know that Europe is becoming communist under the EU. But in case you have no idea, and if you're wondering if this is coming to America, oh, it is. They're even telling you their plans right in front of your face. Now, this comes from the Congressional Record, which is appendix pages 834-835 as of January 10th of 1963. I'm going to leave all of the helpful information in the description box below so that you can take a look at it on your own time. We're only going to go over a few of these current communist goals so that you can see them yourself. But what you'll see is that they're preparing for what? Militarized police state. And just look at number 3 where it says develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States will be a demonstration of moral strength. Is that why Mr. Obama and all those other elite and even celebrities at the top are telling you to get rid of your guns and, oh, we need your guns because of supposed terrorism? Is that why they're doing that? And then number 11 says promote the UN as the only hope for mankind. If its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a what? One world government with its own independent armed forces. Its own independent armed forces? Haven't we been seeing UN trucks in the streets of America? Oh, very interesting and suspicious indeed. Is that a coincidence? Not to mention number 15, where it says capture one or both of the political parties in the United States, because newsflash, you never had a voice to begin with. Your vote never counted to begin with. Just look at Trump and Clinton and you'll see the big joke behind it. But then number 17 says get control of the schools as well as the textbooks and everything. And then number 19 says use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. And then number 20 says infiltrate the press, get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, and policy making positions. Number 21 says gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Number 25 says break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and television. Just look at all of the subliminal TV ads and just look at advertisements and you'll know exactly what it's talking about. But then another interesting one was number 42, where it says create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve economic, political, or social problems, once again feeding into that agenda that we need to come together and merge as a one world government. And then 29 is interesting, where it says discredit the American Constitution, because with these executive orders that are unconstitutional, that's exactly what they've done. Now here's a more official record just so that you can see that this is actually true, that no, it's not made up, because now is the time to seek Yahuwah and his true son Yahusha, because it's only a matter of time until all of this arrives in America. But this is Truth Unveiled here saying shalom.